Tonight, new details emerge about cases where women say they were sterilized without consent.
To be able to bring an issue like that to the forefront in front of the nation was probably the biggest moment of pride for me.
And Logan Staats launches into the big time, but first, a concert back home.
Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. So-called Indian hospital survivors may have filed a $1.1 billion lawsuit against the federal government. But that is triggering memories of abuse from former patients across the country. Paul Alutaluk was sent to the Nanette, Manitoba Sanitarium. He recalls horrific sexual abuse when he was 4 years old. At least 80 Inuit were sent there after a tuberculosis outbreak at Eskimo Point in 1963. If you or any of your loved ones went to an Indian hospital and are looking for more information, email Holly Moore at hmoore@aptn.ca. You can read Paul's full story on aptnnews.ca. The forced sterilization of Indigenous women in Canada is in the international spotlight this week. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights heard from lawyer Alyssa Lombard, who is in charge of a class action lawsuit. More than 50 women are now signed on, alleging they were forcibly sterilized at Saskatchewan hospitals. Lombard called for better training and screening of healthcare providers. Canada's Keith Kahn, an assistant deputy minister in the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch, committed to cooperate at the hearing, saying, "As Canada, we will be supporting any documentation and research and information as required." Marches of solidarity for the families of Colton Bushy and Tina Fontaine have taken place across Canada, many with a focus on supporting youth. Today, one young woman in the Northwest Territories lent her voice to the cause. Jaylene Buggins never thought she would organize a march, but today she joined with other youth in hosting a march for justice. Around 40 community members in Yellowknife attended. Buggins says she would not have gotten through tough times without youth-to-youth support, something Buggins says is crucial with the recent Bushy and Fontaine verdicts.
As Indigenous people, we are not disposable. Our youth are not disposable. Their lives matter. And, I know a lot of youth that have contacted me since a lot of these verdicts, feeling down, feeling like they're disposable and their lives don't have any value within Canada today. And I want to let them know that they do. Their lives are valued and they're very important.
A community gathering and feast was held Tuesday to honor 15-year-old Tina Fontaine and her family. Dozens of family members, elders, political leaders, and high school students attended the meal and ceremony in Fontaine's home community of Seguin First Nation. As CTV Winnipeg's Beth McDonnell reports, Fontaine's family and community is waiting to move forward.
A circle of support for Tina Fontaine's great-aunt Thelma Favel. Last week, 56-year-old Raymond Cormier was found not guilty of second-degree murder in connection with the 15-year-old girl's death. Favel's struggle is not over.
What she's gone through, like the pain, they'll never feel her pain, right? We just want her to know that we're there, to show her that support, whenever she needs it.
This feast in Seguin First Nation, Fontaine's home community, is a way to help the family. Favel tells CTV News she won't give up fighting for justice and for Fontaine, but she's not ready to move forward yet. She says during the trial she stayed at the same Winnipeg hotel Tina had been placed while in the care of Child and Family Services to be close to her, knowing it was one of the last places she was alive. How does it feel to be here today?
I feel honored but emotional.
Grade 11 12 student Brianna Laforte says she used to hang out with Fontaine after class and at baseball games.
She was just really kind to everyone, even if she didn't know you. And she was just a really jolly person and always smiling and laughing.
Laforte and fellow student Mackenzie Morisseau say being here together helps.
The more we get out and talk about it, I feel like everyone else will get onto it because the youth is more empowering.
This is a little gesture to have a meal, have a little bit of a ceremony. What we're here is just to support them and let them know that they're not alone. Right? We're here as a community.
Henderson and Favel say they're thankful for all the love and support near and far in this difficult time. Beth McDonnell, CTV News, Seguin First Nation.
And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter at APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. In Ontario, a Poplar Hill First Nation family says they want answers in the death of their 15-year-old daughter, Kanina Sue Turtle. The child was in the care of Child and Family Services when she died by suicide. That was in October 2016. According to her parents, they had questions about her death and even doubted it was a suicide. But just recently, a grim recording on the girl's iPod was returned to the family. It confirmed the cause of death and opened new wounds and new questions. Kenneth Jackson joins us now. Before we start, please be warned, some may find this conversation disturbing. Kenneth, can you remind us a little bit about Kanina Sue Turtle and who she was?
Kanina is from Poplar Hill First Nation near the Manitoba-Ontario border. She died October 29th, 2016 in Sioux Lookout in a foster home. She was also one of the she was the first of 4 First Nations girls to die in care in Ontario within 6 months. At the time, we talked to her parents at the time, and they didn't believe that she died by suicide. They just couldn't bring themselves to understand why she would do it. But she had been in care for Child Protective Services for, I believe, a couple of years, bouncing around. But at that time in April, they weren't convinced last April that she had died by suicide. But we recently found out some new information that they've uncovered.
So there is this iPod that has this video. Can you tell us about the iPod and how it came into the possession of the family?
Well, I spoke to the father and the mother, both, and their lawyer, and they said in the summertime, shortly after we spoke, that they were given an iPod by the police that belonged to their daughter Kanina. Police said they couldn't actually access it because they didn't know the passcode, but they told them that there was a video on there. And what happened, it was Kanina filming her suicide in the foster home in Sioux Lookout. The family was able to figure out the passcode and watch for the first time on their daughter dying by suicide. So while they didn't believe it before, they saw it with their own eyes. I ended up finding out about it just last week, and I had to watch that video. I've never seen someone die before. I've covered a lot of child services stories, child welfare stories, child protective stories. That's why they're in care, to be protected. That's the idea of it. But this little girl was left alone in a back room of foster care home for over 45 minutes. The story that's online doesn't give a lot of details, so I won't get into it now. Regardless, by the time someone found her, and this is a girl that had tried to die by suicide the day before and had self-harm leading up to it. So there was concern for her safety, or there should have been. The problem is I haven't been able to get any answers from Tikanagan Child and Family Services that removed her from the home or the province. That's an issue. Even in death, they won't answer any questions. They hide in a cloak of privacy.
You've been in touch with the family. What are they telling you?
They're telling me that they still don't have answers as to why she was left alone for 45 minutes. They know that she was in a bad spot, like in terms of her mental well-being. There was concern. The family had concern for her. They're saying Tikanagan won't give them any answers. They've told her, they've told them all along that she died by suicide, but essentially that's it. And they had to crack an iPod to see it for themselves. And maybe that's not, maybe that's not anyone's fault that it was filmed or that they had to see it that way. But that's the reality of what happened with this family. A mother and father had to watch their daughter die by suicide, and I've seen it. It's awful. It's a terrible thing to see.
Okay, thanks, Kenneth. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Brittany.
You can read the whole story on Kanina Sue Turtle on our website at aptnnews.ca. Time for a quick break, and then we'll take a deep look at what happens when public figures make their own racist views known.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast, +5 in Halifax and Charlottetown. Snow and +1 for Happy Valley Goose Bay, -6 in La Grande. +2 in Montreal, -4 in Val d'Or. Sunny skies across parts of southern Ontario, +3 in Windsor, +1 in Sarnia. Sunny and -6 in Timmins, 0 in Thunder Bay. In northern Manitoba, sunny and -7 in Flin Flon and the Pas, -4 in Brandon, -1 and cloudy in Winnipeg. Over to Saskatchewan, 0 in Regina, -7 in North Battleford. Sunny and -10 in Buffalo Narrows, -12 in Stony Rapids.
Racism underpins much of the local and systemic violence against Indigenous people in Canada. But what happens when public figures make their own racist views known? Some people say recent events reveal an important phenomenon hampering reconciliation. Here's APTN's Justin Brake.
Social media has put anti-Indigenous racism on full display, including the widespread belief that efforts to assimilate Indigenous peoples are either a thing of the past or someone else's problem.
These stories are far overshadowed by tragic accounts of the emotional, physical, and sexual abuse and neglect of helpless children.
Despite her party's residential school apology a decade ago, last year Senator Lynn Bayak argued the schools were not all bad, and that while the negative issues around them must be addressed, it is unfortunate that they are sometimes magnified and considered more newsworthy than the abundance of good that came from them. Rai Moran, director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation, says one of the holdups for reconciliation in Canada is some people's unwillingness or inability to understand the truth.
And we have to be very honest with ourselves, and we have to, as a country, drop the natural defense mechanisms that we have, which is denialism, head-in-the-sandism, rejectionism, and disbelief that we are, in fact, telling the truth, and that this truth has been unequivocally proven.
Moran says while the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report highlights some residential school survivors' warm memories, those accounts should never be used to downplay Canada's efforts to assimilate Indigenous peoples.
Yes, it is nuanced, but again, the big story is of a system that was forcibly trying to convert Indigenous people and children into something that they were not.
Last Thursday, Cree Senator Mary Jane McCallum issued an open letter to Bayak, saying no amount of good memories can override the negative experiences I've gone through in the past 60 years due to the teachings of residential school. In January, this poster appeared on bulletin boards at the University of New Brunswick's Fredericton campus, urging people to reject the anti-white narrative being pushed in media and academia, and to stop the slander of the founding Europeans of Canada. It also argued that overwhelmingly Native Americans are beneficiaries and not victims of the society built by Europeans.
I think there's blame on both sides.
Like the so-called Trump effect in the United States, some say Bayak's comments opened up space for others who hold racist views, like the ones expressed in the UNB poster.
When leading public figures are making these kinds of statements, then people who already hold these views feel empowered to make these statements. So they were found at about 11 a.m.
Matthew Sears is an associate professor of classics and ancient history at UNB. One of the posters was found outside his office. Like Bayak, the posters claim there was some good in residential schools.
Trying to say that there are two sides, or it wasn't deliberate cultural genocide, or there are good stories to come out of these, is, to my mind, intellectually the same as Holocaust denial.
Sears shared the poster on Twitter, calling it white supremacist. He also said the consequences of marginalizing Indigenous peoples in the name of free speech hurt real people. Let's all stand against this cowardice and bigotry and call out everyone enabling it. Sears says one of the people enabling it is Dr. Rick Mehta, an associate professor of psychology at Acadia University.
The key issue is was the output that came from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission truly representative of what actually happened in that chapter of our history.
In January, Meta publicly supported Bayak, tweeting at Conservative leader Andrew Scheer, "You claim to support free speech, yet you remove Senator Bayak from your caucus. Where is the evidence of racism?" But in the days and weeks that followed, on social media, Meta's arguments moved beyond supporting free speech. He said the TRC was based on a biased process that didn't take all views into account, and that it was designed to create a victim narrative that could then be used as a basis for endless apologies and compensation. The TRC documented at least 6,000 children who died while attending residential school, from malnutrition, physical and sexual abuse, and disease. But Meta questions whether the roughly 150,000 children who attended the schools were treated any differently.
In terms of the abuse, I mean, the norms at that time were very different, so I'd want to see what the comparisons were in terms of the non-First Nation students, so how were they treated? We had nothing to do with those atrocities that were done in the past, and so I don't think any of us want to take blame or made to feel guilty.
Sears thinks differently and says the posters found on his campus and public comments from people like Meta are the perfect opportunity to identify racism and denialism and to educate Canadians about the true history of Canada.
Having sort of privilege and having systemic and institutional disparities pointed out, people don't like that. It's an uncomfortable feeling.
Many have challenged Meta's claims online, but Meta has muted most of them so that he can't see their arguments. One of those people was Cindy Blackstock, who asked Meta to back up his claims with peer-reviewed academic research.
When you simply mute out the world that doesn't agree with you, then that's not free speech. You can't say that you're open to free speech while you're pressing the mute button on everyone who disagrees with you. That's not my view of free speech anyway.
Moran says the TRC, which gathered 6,000 testimonies over 7 years, already uncovered the truth about residential schools, and he questions those seeking to undermine the TRC's credibility.
When is enough truth enough truth? For those that are seeking to find the silver lining in the cloud or to deny that the residential schools were bad, we really got to be honest. Why are we trying to do this? Why are you looking for the good in this? Just sit with the bad for a minute and actually put yourself in the shoes of that child.
In the wake of the Bayak controversy, the Gerald Stanley verdict, racism within the RCMP, and the denial of systemic efforts to assimilate the First Peoples, Indigenous and ally voices across Canada are saying,
"No truth, no reconciliation."
Justin Brake, APTN National News, Halifax.
Earlier this week, Acadia University launched an investigation into Professor Rick Mehta's comments. For more information on that, go to aptnnews.ca and search for Justin Brake's story. Time for another break, but before that, here's a preview of tonight's Nation to Nation.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran. Here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. We take one last look at Budget 2018. Political panel of MPs debates whether another $4.8 billion in new spending will close the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples. As well, the budget earmarked $1.3 billion for conservation. I talked to someone who is cautiously optimistic that some of that funding could be a windfall for Indigenous communities. And I'll take a brief look at a Senate committee where the topic was how First Nations fit into Bill C-45, the new cannabis law. It's immediately following the national news.
Here's a look at the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. A cloudy -9 in Peace River and Grand Prairie. Snow and -7 in Edmonton. -5 in Calgary. Cloudy day on the west coast. +5 in Penticton, Kamloops, and Bella Coola. -10 in Fort St. John. Sunny and -13 in Dease Lake. Colder temps in Yukon, -20 in Dawson City, -23 in Old Crow. Over to NWT, -16 in Fort Simpson, a sunny -21 in Norman Wells, -25 in Colville Lake, a chilly -31 in Sax Harbor. Sunny skies in parts of Nunavut, -17 in Whale Cove, -28 in Cambridge Bay, -14 in Cape Dorset, a sunny -21 in Resolute.
Welcome back. Six Nations recording artist Logan Staats and winner of CTV's The Launch held his first live concert since Canada saw him on the national TV show. APTN's David Moses had a chance to chat with Staats prior to his show in Brantford last weekend.
She's living a life her heart can't afford.
Logan Staats is riding a high, headlining his first concert at the beautiful Sanderson Centre, where he opened for Buffy St. Marie. I asked him how he got approached to be on The Launch.
Honestly, man, it was one of the most challenging things I've ever done. And it all started about 6 months ago. Well, I guess 8 months now. And I was contacted by a PR team from Bell Media, right? And they told me about this show, you know, and at the time I was kind of like, you know, I kind of didn't really believe them, you know, but then it turned out to be real. So that was great. And yeah, basically I submitted a video submission, and then they gave me a call back a couple days later, and I was in Toronto filming at a TV studio.
In some ways, the concert was like being at The Launch, because Vivian Hicks, who was on The Launch with him, was his opening act. Playing in front of a full house in his hometown, the love-in started early between Logan and the audience. But singing The Lucky Ones had its challenges for Logan.
It was really difficult for me. You know, I'm a singer-songwriter. I'm a storyteller. You know, so it was hard for me to grasp the whole concept of singing someone else's song. You know, that was the most difficult thing for me. You know, but I guess mentally I just kind of went through this thought process with the lyrics and really felt why I was lucky.
But this opportunity has not just been about the hype and success.
The pride for me on the show, like besides winning, you know, or besides singing The Lucky Ones, was being able to speak about my great-grandparents and their history at the residential school, you know, and that was something that was super important for me to talk about a little, just because, you know, I didn't even learn about it in school. Nobody learned about it in school. And to be able to bring an issue like that to the forefront in front of the nation was probably the biggest moment of pride for me.
Logan will be heading to Nashville in the next month to work on new material and songwriting. David Moses, APTN National News, Brantford, Ontario.
Another big congratulations to Staats on his award-winning performance on The Launch. That's your APTN National News for this Thursday. For news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Now stick around. Nation to Nation with Ton Labrand is up next. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.